Hi, we're going to take a look at chapter 2, which is about economics. And economics is one of the most fascinating topics, at least I believe anyway, because it's about the study of people and their choices. And there's nothing more fascinating than people. You see in a definition here about the choices of people, the companies, governments. So it's how people, entities, governments, how they make their choices. You see down at the bottom of the screen, you see two different types of studies of economics. The macroeconomics is where we look at the whole, in this you'll see like unemployment, you'll see consumer price index, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the chapter. You'll also see more on what's called the aggregate, which again means the whole. Next, you see the microeconomics, and this is where we take a look more at supply demand on an individual level. So it could be by a specific group, it could be by a specific product. So microeconomics is taking a look at smaller things, where again, macro is looking at the whole. Now, there was a dot-com bust in the early 2000s. Yeah, in the mid 1990s, when the internet was starting to really take stride, people were starting internet businesses. And what really was the true problem was that people had great ideas. They just didn't know how to get people, their products to people, the transportation issue. And then you can see how, of course, we had the 9/11 attacks, and it was a rough time. It really was a tough time, not only for the country on a whole, but also for individuals at a micro level. And so what happened after this, you can see something called the subprime loan. And what a subprime loan is where a loan is given to a customer who really doesn't have the means to pay it back. So they may have a low credit score, they may not have enough income coming in. And so they got a loan for a house that they really didn't know, really couldn't afford. And so what happened here is that banks, and don't fall into this trap, is that the banks would say, okay, let's say, for example, you make $10,000 and by the, and that's gross pay. And you get a net pay of say $8,000. Now, gross pay is how much you earn before taxes is taken out. Net pay is how much you earn after taxes and any type of deductions are taken out. Well, these lenders were telling people, hey, base it on your gross pay, not your net pay. And so they were showing, yep, you can afford this house, you're making the money. But in reality, they weren't making the money because, again, the deductions and taxes. So that led to the bust in the financial market, and it also left the bust in the housing market too. And so we can see here in terms of the TARP, where there was a tax reduction, there was more money stimulus package given to build infrastructure, and you can see here also about the green energy investment. So the government was trying to take a role into stimulate the economy, get everything back on track. And we're going to talk about planned economies and capitalism, but there's also going to be a mixture of the two, and we'll talk about that. So fiscal policy, we talked a little bit about this in the first chapter. A fiscal policy is done by the government, usually by the legislative branch, and this is where they kind of control the money, the taxation, you will, with the tax rates and how they get the money. Now, you see this idea about the debt ceiling and fiscal cliff. So what'll happen is that the Congress will say, okay, and we'll just use arguments, we'll just round numbers for argument's sake. Let's just say Congress said, hey, we have $1,000 budget, that's what we're spending. Well, and then in the next quarter, next time they do a budget, they say, okay, now we'll raise this up to 1,500 and 2,000, etc. But we always seem to hit up on our budget. And so what happens is that the government has to extend itself and pay more toward their bills and toward any type of entitlement programs that they have to pay. So, and this doesn't happen. This doesn't matter if who's in office. It could be someone on the left. It could be someone from the right. There will always be an increase in the debt ceiling because of inflation and because we're getting older, so we need to pay more in medical expenses. There's less people who are paying taxes because our population's going down. And so we always have to raise our spending. And again, no matter what party's in office, this is the case. It's been the case this way since the 80s. So in regards to surplus again is when we take more tax revenue in than we have coming out. Deficit, again, we're spending more than we're taking in. I'm not going to worry too much about this slide. Again, this is from 2020, and you can see the numbers here. Again, I'm not going to read this to you. You can take a look at this. You can read a little bit more about this if you want to. Monetary policy is done by the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is an independent agency that is controlled by the Fed chief. And what we have to look at here is they have two functions: control inflation and make sure that unemployment is low. And they have a couple tools. Mainly it is the interest rates that banks borrow from the government in order how much money they need. So for example, if the rate that the banks are getting from the government is 4%, there's a pretty good chance that they're going to turn around and give us 7% interest, 8% interest, because banks make their money on interest. And so that's kind of the thing that we have to take a look at here. But primarily, they try to control inflation by reducing or increasing the rates, but they also can try to stimulate the economy. If we have high unemployment, they'll lower the interest rate so that to try to stimulate growth. If inflation is too high, they'll increase interest rates to try to tap down the economy so we don't have enough inflation. The inflation target for the Federal Reserve is 2%. Money, I think you have a pretty good idea what that is. I just want to tell you what the M1 supply is. The M1 money supply, you can see checks, cash, traveler's checks. Some of you may not have heard that before. What a traveler's check is back in the day, you used to be able to go to the bank. You could get American Express traveler's checks or Visa traveler's checks. You give the bank cash, and they would give you these traveler's checks, and these checks were accepted basically all over the world. Businesses would take them because they already knew they were paid for and subsidized and supported by a bank. So you can go just about anywhere in the world and use these. And what was nice is like you got American Express, I'm not sure about Visa, but if these traveler's checks were lost or stolen, you can get them replaced. Don't use traveler's checks much anymore because we have our debit cards that we use. But that's a traveler's check. In regards to M2 supply, we got everything of M1. Certificates of deposit. What a CD is where you give money to the bank. It's kind of like a savings account. You will not lose money in a CD, but you're not going to make a lot of money either because of the safety net that it has. So let's say, for example, that you give $1,000 CD to the bank. They'll probably pay you, and this is an exaggeration, maybe 0.75% or 1% interest for the whole entire year. And if you withdraw that money early from the CD, you're penalized. So the CDs are safe, but you're not going to get rich off of them. The discount rate, again, we're talking earlier about how banks give money. I'm sorry, the Federal Reserve will give banks money, but it's all through an interest rate. And so that's the discount rate. Now, this open market operations, that's kind of interesting. What the Federal Reserve will do is that to try to stimulate the economy, they will buy U.S. bonds to try to put money into the market and to stimulate growth. When the market is not doing well, they'll take money out, and so they'll exchange their bonds. So this is something we gotta be careful of. This is a pretty good indicator of how strong or how weak the Federal Reserve believes our economy is doing. Capitalism, that's what we have right now. It's a free market. There's choices from consumers. You can go anywhere and buy something, whether it be from Walmart, from Target, wherever the case may be. Okay, so there should be some fair competition here, and typically in a capitalist society there is. There's no government intervention with this. The ideas behind capitalism here, you can see here the right to own a business and keep after-tax profits. You made it, you keep it after taxes. I'm going to move over just a little bit here. You see that right to free choice, as we talked about earlier. You go to Walmart, you go to Target, wherever you want to go. And as a consumer, we depend upon that fair competition. So, for example, if you go to a town and there's only one grocery store, they may be able to raise prices a little bit because there's no competition. Now you bring another store in, or even second store, so there'll be 3 total in the town. Now the first store's got to bring their prices down. So capitalism and competition is really good for consumers. There's different types of there's different types of systems for I'm sorry, first of competition. The first one here is pure competition, and with that is that you go to a tourist destination. They all sell the same type of t-shirts. They all sell the same type of trinkets. That's pure competition. Everything's pretty much the same there. There's a lot of stores. Monopolistic competition. Um, think about fast food. You go down a road, you might see a McDonald's, you might see Burger King, you might see Taco Bell, you might see a KFC, you might see Jimmy John's. That's monopolistic competition. The market structure is fast food. The barriers to entry to low. We can have a food truck. We can have a food truck along the line and start a business there or start selling food. So it's very easy to get into a business or get into that competition. Oligopoly. These are where there is few large players in an industry and the barrier to entry is really high because of the cost structure. And what happens, these oligopolies depend upon price. So for example, airlines, we want to fly out of, let's say, Chicago, and we want to fly from Chicago to San Francisco. United says, okay, I'm going to charge $350 for that flight. Delta would fly Chicago to San Francisco and probably charge about $350 too. United says, we're going to change our price. We're going to now go to $300. Since there's few players, Delta doesn't want to lose market share, so they'll lower their price too to try to match United. Now, on the flip side of that, United might say, well, we charge $350 now, we want to go to $400. Delta's like, no, we don't want to do that. We're going to try to get United's market share. Then United will come back and lower their price to $350. That's oligopolies, and it's a unique pricing structure. Monopolies, I think, have a pretty idea. There's one producer. These can be regulated by the government because they're only one player. So, the one that we think about the most is power companies. Supply and demand. So in regards to supply, this is what the producers want to put out. This is, they want to put out as much as possible at the highest price possible. We as consumers, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but we as consumers, we want to as much, but we want to buy it as low as possible. We want a lot, but we want a lower price. So we got a couple things to show you here. So in regards to, and I'm going to just, this equilibrium price, that's where supply and demand meet, and I'll show you that. So you take a look at a supply curve, and with the supply, you can see how supply goes up. So the businesses, they want, hey, we want as much as possible into the market. So they're going to supply as much as they can. We as consumers, you can see here, the price goes down the more quantity there is. So we want to buy things as cheap as possible. So what we have here is a compromise. The compromise is what's called the equilibrium price. The equilibrium price is where that supply and demand curve meet. So like this X, for example. So it's kind of like an agreement between the market and the demand, the people selling the product and people buying the product. Now in an econ class, you'll see how this shifts. You'll see how changes in market can make a difference in the supply curve and demand curve, but we'll save that for econ. So I hope you guys are doing good so far. One thing I want to talk about, we earlier in the discussion, we talked about planned economies when compared to capitalism. So I just want to talk about a couple of these. The first one is socialism. Socialism is where the government has control of some larger organizations within the country. Communism, we see there's public ownership of just about everything. And there's a very, very strong, hard government to dictate the terms of the market. Now, this mixed economies, and we're kind of seeing a little bit of this. This is where capitalism and government kind of come into play with each other. So in regards to mixed economies here in the U.S., the Postal Service, for example, Amtrak. So we have these government entities that sell products and it provide a service, and then we still have the businesses around that, for capitalism, that we can pick and choose what we want. So, if we want, we can choose to ride a bus, or we can drive, we can take a plane. So there's still competition for this, but it's a government-owned entity. And then what's happening too is that we're seeing these more privatization of government-owned businesses. So there's been talk about privatizing the mail system. There's been talk for years about privatizing Amtrak or even get rid of it altogether. So there are government agencies, larger government agencies, but you'll see this trend. Not, well, trend's the wrong term, but you see the concept of privatization of these. So in regards to measuring the economy and how it's working, gross domestic product. The gross domestic product is typically measured quarterly, and it's the amount of production within a country's borders within that quarter. And that's going to give you an idea how well the economy is doing. The unemployment rate. The unemployment rate dictates how many people who are being surveyed. That's the key here, who are being surveyed that are looking for work. And you can see how the terms here is actively seeking employment. Now, if they're not working and if they're not working, they're not seeking employment, they are not counted as part of this unemployment rate. So no matter, again, who's in control of the government, whether it be people on the left or people on the right, with unemployment, you typically want to add 6% to the number that's stated by the government, because these people are either not looking for work, there's something called the underground economy where they're getting paid and not declaring that money, or there could be other rationales, but those are basically the two that we'll focus on. So again, they could not be looking for work. They could be doing the underground economy. Okay, so let's talk about recessions and depressions. So recession is where we see a decrease in GDP growth over 2 consecutive quarters. So if we're seeing decline in growth for the last 6 months, there's going to be a decrease. I'm sorry, there's going to be a recession. And the depression is where that recession lasts a long time. We haven't had a depression since the 1930s. I don't see us having one in the near future, but recessionary periods do happen from time to time. And you see here expansion, robust period, high employment. That's a good thing. So the business cycle. I know I'm getting a little long with this. I promise to wrap this up soon. In the business cycle, you see these troughs. We have peaks and valleys. So the peak is where we have this growth, and at the peak is where we top out. And then usually we start going down, contractions, and then we go to the bottom, we hit rock bottom, and hit the top. And you see this recovery here. Historically, about every 3 years, you would see this business cycle, these peaks and valleys and troughs. Lately, I mean, we've been through uncharted waters. We've had economic growth for, better part of a decade and a half. We've been times of struggle, especially with the COVID, and we're recovering from COVID. So we've been through economic growth. Now, of course, the question becomes, how much is the right amount of growth? Is it because the growth is at, let's say, 2%? Is that good enough? Some people say yes, some people say no. Some people want it at 4%. So there's different philosophies behind this. I'm not going to get into that, but just know that there's different opinions about how good the business cycle is. Inflationary pressures, that's where we see prices go up over the economy. Okay. There could be multiple reasons for that. There could be a stimulus from the government into the economy. There could be, let's say, oil, if oil gets too much, because basically everything we do is based upon the oil industry, in terms of plastics and transportation. We can see expenses there rise. Consumer price index, we talked about this a little bit earlier in the discussion. The CPI is just a measure of how much we're paying for things, if it's growing over time. And notice how it's the price of goods and services. So we're not just looking at what we buy at the grocery store. It's also what else we buy. Is it, going to get your car fixed, or even if you get your hair cut, that's still a service. And what's happening is the U.S. economy is becoming more of a from an industrial base to now of a service-based economy. Producer price index, same thing. It's how much it costs for companies to produce their products. And again, these can be more expensive. Again, wages go up, uh, oil, energy, the prices of electricity. So there's many things that could cause the rise of producer prices. All right, last slide. We're talking about productivity here. Productivity is, how well we're producing things. You can see the equation on the screen, output divided input is equal productivity. That is true. And I look at this as, we try to output as much as we can based upon the input. And so we want to be efficient as possible. And there's these differences in economics, and I don't want to get into this, efficiency and effectiveness. And we want a happy medium between both. But really, you want to take a look at the efficiency, how well the company is using its resources, and hopefully use those resources to its maximum potential. And that will be productivity. All right, I've gone over 20 minutes with this. I apologize. I try to keep these around 15 minutes, but I hope you enjoyed this presentation. If you have any questions at all, please let me know. I'm here to help, and I will see you in chapter 3. Take care of yourselves.